kita bangun Indonesia. Tiba saat kita semua ambil peran serta mencatat Indonesia. Tiba saat kita semua makin sejahtera, makmur sentosa, Indonesia maju. Ayo untuk Indonesia satu, hebat pula semakin kuat. Dari Sumatera hingga ujung Papua, bersama kita bangun Indonesia. Tiba saat kita semua ambil peran serta mencatat Indonesia. Tiba saat kita semua makin sejahtera, makmur sentosa, Indonesia maju. Semua yang di kota dan di desa, bantu negara menentukan masa depan kita. Capai tujuan, sukseskan pembangunan. Tiba saat kita semua ambil peran serta mencatat Indonesia. Tiba saat kita semua makin sejahtera, makmur sentosa, Indonesia maju. Indonesia maju.
Politeknik Statistika SAIS is an official college.
Halo semuanya, semoga semua sehat-sehat ya. Masih ingat dengan yang ini?
Tiba saat kita semua ambil peran serta mencatat Indonesia.
Atau yang ini?
Tiba saat kita semua makin sejahtera, makmur sentosa, Indonesia maju. Indonesia maju.
Bener banget, sensus penduduk 2020. Pertama, kami mengucapkan terima kasih kepada seluruh penduduk Indonesia yang telah berpartisipasi pada sensus penduduk 2020, baik yang mengisi secara online maupun saat didatangi oleh petugas sensus. Perjalanan mencatat Indonesia pada tahun 2020 telah merekam jumlah penduduk Indonesia sebanyak 270,2 juta jiwa dengan 136,7 juta laki-laki dan 133,5 juta perempuan. Banyak banget ya. Jumlah itu setara dengan gabungan jumlah penduduk beberapa negara di Eropa seperti Jerman, Italia, Inggris, dan Prancis pada tahun 2020. Nah, pada bulan Mei hingga Juni 2022 akan ada kegiatan sensus penduduk 2020 lanjutan atau SP 2020 lanjutan. SP 2020 lanjutan merupakan rangkaian pendataan lapangan tahap kedua dari pelaksanaan sensus penduduk 2020. Tujuannya menyediakan parameter demografi serta karakteristik penduduk lainnya untuk perencanaan dan evaluasi pembangunan. Dari hasil SP 2020 lanjutan, kita bisa tahu berapa bayi yang lahir, berapa orang yang pindah, berapa orang yang meninggal, berapa penduduk yang bekerja, bagaimana kondisi perumahan penduduk, dan informasi lainnya. Artinya, dengan informasi yang lebih detail, data yang dimiliki menjadi lebih lengkap dan komprehensif, sehingga pemerintah memiliki data yang lebih akurat dan tepat sasaran sebagai dasar kebijakan pembangunan, seperti kebijakan terkait perumahan, kesehatan, kelahiran, dan lain sebagainya. Semua itu tak lepas dari peran Bapak, Ibu, dan teman-teman juga loh. Saat pendataan SP 2020 lanjutan nanti, kami mengharapkan kesediaan Bapak Ibu semua menerima petugas sensus dan menjawab pertanyaan dengan lengkap, benar, dan jujur. SP 2020 lanjutan akan dilakukan dalam 2 tahap di seluruh Indonesia, namun wilayah yang didata akan dipilih secara sampel. Pendataan akan diawali dengan kunjungan petugas sensus ke seluruh rumah tangga di wilayah terpilih pada bulan Mei 2022. Tujuannya adalah untuk mendata seluruh tempat tinggal hasil pendataan SP 2020 sebelumnya. Tahap ini disebut dengan tahap pemutakhiran. Pada bulan Juni 2022, petugas sensus akan kembali datang ke rumah tangga terpilih untuk melakukan pendataan dengan pertanyaan yang lebih lengkap. Jadi, ada rumah tangga yang didatangi sekali saja untuk dilakukan pemutakhiran data, dan ada rumah tangga yang didatangi 2 kali untuk pendataan yang lebih lengkap. Nantinya, Bapak, Ibu, dan teman-teman semua bisa mengenali petugas sensus BPS dari atribut yang digunakan. Setiap petugas sensus yang datang akan mengenakan rompi, tanda pengenal, membawa tas dan dokumen atau perangkat survei elektronik, dan memakai alat perlindungan diri seperti face shield dan masker, serta membawa hand sanitizer. Jika Bapak, Ibu, dan teman-teman ragu, silakan mengonfirmasi pada Ketua RT atau pengurus lingkungan setempat karena petugas sensus sudah berkoordinasi terlebih dahulu. Tapi, datanya aman nggak nih? Tenang, seluruh data yang dikumpulkan oleh BPS aman. Pendataan yang dilakukan oleh BPS dilindungi oleh undang-undang dan tidak untuk disebarluaskan. Jadi, terima kedatangan petugas sensus dan berikan jawaban yang lengkap, benar, dan jujur. Ingat, jawaban Bapak, Ibu, dan teman-teman semua akan sangat menentukan masa depan bangsa. Untuk info lebih lanjut, silakan akses website sensus.bps.go.id, akun resmi media sosial BPS, atau silakan menghubungi BPS Kabupaten Kota setempat. Mari bersama mencatat Indonesia.
Kuatkan semangatmu, yakinkan dirimu, maju bersama Indonesia. Dari ujung Sumatera hingga Papua terbentang alam yang indah. Kekayaan negeri yang melimpah ruah ada di bumi Indonesia. Bahu-membahu kita semua demi masa depan bangsa Indonesia. Kita pasti bisa hadapi tantangan bersama. Mari kita semua mencatat Indonesia. Memajukan asa pertanian negeri kita. Satukan hati kita maju bersama untuk masa depan. Kekayaan negeri yang melimpah ruah ada di bumi Indonesia. Bahu-membahu kita semua demi masa depan bangsa Indonesia. Kita pasti bisa hadapi tantangan bersama.
Polytechnic Statistika SAES is an official college that is engaged in statistics. Under the auspices of Badan Pusat Statistik, which has an active role in providing data in Indonesia, Polytechnic Statistika SAES has produced generations that are qualified in the statistics each year.
Oke, Polstat STIS ini dulunya bernama Akademi Ilmu Statistik. Itu didirikan pada tahun 1958. Pada waktu itu BPS juga baru berdiri. Dan kita sangat menyadari bahwa untuk membuat perencanaan yang bagus itu perlu data yang akurat. Karena pada waktu itu jumlah statistisi di Indonesia masih sangat sedikit, maka BPS membentuk Akademi Ilmu Statistik yang kemudian dalam sejarahnya berkembang menjadi Sekolah Tinggi Ilmu Statistik dan sekarang menjadi Polstat Statistik. Jadi intinya Polstat STIS ini dibentuk untuk menghasilkan statistisi muda dengan harapan mereka bisa menghasilkan data statistik yang berkualitas yang akan digunakan sebagai pijakan untuk membuat kebijakan.
In order to continue to support the availability of data in Indonesia, Polytechnic Statistika SAES has vision to become a quality and superior university in applied statistics that makes a real contribution to the statistical system, national and international. This is actualized through the mission of Polytechnic Statistika SAES, which is to provide education and the applied statistics that capable of supporting the main tasks and functions of Badan Pusat Statistik and other government ministries and institutions, forming professional integrity and trustworthy academic people. Because of the increasing needs of statistics, the number of Polytechnic Statistika SAES students continues to increase annually. Since 2017, the number of students received has reached 600 people from all provinces in Indonesia. Polytechnic Statistika SAES opens two educational programs. There are Bachelor and Professional Bachelor. The Bachelor program consists of the Bachelor of Statistics. The Professional Bachelor program consists of the Professional Bachelor of Statistics, which is divided into specialization in economic statistics and population social statistics, as well as the Professional Bachelor of Statistical Computing, which is divided into two specialization programs. There are Data Science and Statistical Information System. To support the course of the lecture, Polytechnic Statistika SAES is equipped with various adequate facilities and infrastructures. There are 38 classrooms with complete facilities, 3 computer laboratories, auditorium, libraries, gymnastic room, clinic, student cooperative, and a mosque. Professional lectures is one component that cannot be separated from the lecture process. Polytechnic Statistika SAES has 78 of lectures, with 81% of them with master's degree and 19% with doctoral degree that they got from both domestic and foreign universities. Lecturers at the Polytechnic Statistika SAES are not only graduates of the statistic major, but also graduates of economic, social sciences, and IT major. Under the auspices of Badan Pusat Statistik, graduates of Polytechnic Statistika SAES are scattered in Badan Pusat Statistik of Regency and City in all provinces Indonesia.
Ya, lulusan Politeknik Statistika SAES selain menjadi ASN yang nantinya menjadi tulang punggung perstatistikan nasional baik di pusat maupun di daerah, juga memiliki kesempatan untuk bisa berkarir di bidang lain yang tentunya menggunakan data atau statistik sebagai core bisnisnya. Jadi bisa juga bekerja di kementerian lain atau juga swasta yang pasti mengikuti perkembangan ilmu pengetahuan teknologi khususnya di bidang statistika dan juga teknologi informasi.
Polytechnic Statistika STS students are not only qualified in academics, but also in non-academic fields. This is supported by the existence of various student activity units such as in the fields of sports, arts, education and culture, social affairs, entrepreneurship, and journalism. The implementation of academic and non-academic activities has been proven with the achievements in various competitions at the regional, national, and international level. Polytechnic Statistika STS is committed to continue producing statisticians that play an active role in providing data to support nation developments.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen and honorable guests. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to the general lecture, Understanding the Economy and National Statistical Office Response to Shortages, Disruption, and COVID-19, a lesson learned from Australian Bureau of Statistics. I am Nori Wilantika. I am taking the privilege of accompanying you in this event today. I'd like to give a warm welcome to our honorable guests, Your Excellency, the Deputy of Methodology and Statistical Information, Statistics Indonesia, Doctor of Engineering, Imam Mahdi, Your Excellency, Director of Polytechnic Statistika STS, Dr. Erni Triastuti, the Honorable Speaker, Mr. Michael Ambodante, Director of International Relations, Australian Bureau of Statistics, Ms. Darian Collin, Assistant Director of International Relations, Australian Bureau of Statistics, lecturers, students, and all distinguished ladies and gentlemen. First of all, we will have the opening remarks from Director of Polytechnic Statistika STS. Please welcome Mrs. Erni Triastuti.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Good morning all. The Honorable Director and Assistant Director of International Relations, Australian Bureau of Statistics, Pak Michael and Bu Darian, welcome to campus. The Honorable Director of Price Statistics, Pak Windy, terima kasih sudah hadir. The Vice Director of Polytechnic Statistika SAS, lecturer, staff, and student of Polytechnic Statistika SAS. First of all, I will take this opportunity, and it is my great pleasure and honor or welcome you all here in Polytechnic Statistika SAS. It's still pandemic, but we can gathering here. It's a pleasure to meet you all for the first time, for the student, and I'm very happy that you are able to spare some time in your busy schedule to attend this guest lecture from Australian Bureau of Statistics. I would like to thank our guest speaker, Mr. Michael Abodante, and his team for sharing this knowledge and expertise. The theme of today's issue is very interesting, I think. What do the soil and flowers have in common? I think it's a metaphor, and it is so curious to know what inside the theme. Sorted in Australia, we will be learning and discussing the Australian government response to the COVID-19. Welcome, Pak Imam. And more insight for us, Civitas Academica of Polytechnic Statistica STIS, especially in order to enrich our research consolidation related to Indonesian national strategic issue as directed by our Chief Statistician of Statistik Indonesia, Bapak Margo Yuwono. Mr. Abodante and the ABS team, Polytechnic Statistica has 3 study programs: Diploma 3 in Statistics, Diploma 4 in Statistics, and Diploma 4 in Statistical Computing. We have almost 2,400 students here, but mostly now they are in their hometown because because of the pandemic, and they learn from their home. The study program included data science and statistical information system, and providing us with its truly richness and collaboration academic environment. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude my remarks, indeed it is my sincere hope that at the end of today's lecture, the participant will have developed a deep awareness and interesting in real-world example and how tight quality data can support effective policy making. I hope that all of you enjoy today's lecture. Thank you all. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mrs. Erni Triastuti, for delivering your remarks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the main agenda for today's event. We will be learning from the prominent speaker, Mr. Michael Abodante, Director of International Relations, Australian Bureau of Statistics. Acts as the moderator, Dr. Nuko Widowati, the Assistant Professor from Polytechnic Statistica STIS. Without further ado, Mr. Michael Abodante and Mrs. Nuko Widowati, please proceed to the stage.
Thank you very much, Nori, for introducing me. Your Excellency, the Deputy of Methodology and Statistical Information, BPS Statistik Indonesia, Dr. Imam Mahdi, the Honorable Director of Polytechnic Statistica STIS, Dr. Erni Triastuti, MMath, the Honorable Speaker, Mr. Michael Abodante, distinguished guests, lecturers, students, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. In this wonderful Friday morning, we will have an outstanding presentation from our prominent speaker, Mr. Michael Abodante, whom I believe shall enrich our insight and knowledge regarding the theme, what ABS as an NSO has and will do during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, please allow me to introduce the speaker. Mr. Michael Abodante is the Director of International Relations, Australian Bureau of Statistics. His educational background is Master of Business Administration from Monash University and Bachelor of Commerce from University of Canberra. Before working in the present post, he worked for International Account Section, Australian's Balance of Payment and International Investment Statistics, and worked across the Australian government to deliver bespoke statistical outputs responding to the policy needs of partner agencies. The title of his presentation today is What Do Diesel and Flowers Have in Common? The Adblue Shortage in Australia. Mr. Abundante will present his presentation around 45 minutes, and then we will have a polling section. So I hope all of you pay attention for Mr. Abundante lecture, and then we continue to the question and answer session. I will welcome the participants both from this auditorium and also from online participation. Please, for the online participation, you may use the raise hand features or filling the question using the shared link in the chat box. Are you ready for the lecture? Without waiting any longer, please, Mr. Michael Abundante, the floor is all yours.
Terima kasih.
Sama-sama.
Terima kasih. Can you hear me? Excellent. I just wanted to say thank you first and foremost to Pak Margo, Pak Imam, Bu Ernie for inviting me here today. Thank you very much. So for the students, selamat pagi. Apa kabar? Sudah sarapan? Yes? Yeah? Okay, okay. All right, so we'll start now. So this is the culmination of a fantastic week that we've had here in Jakarta. It's a wonderful time to be here, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones at the BPS. We've sat together over the week to talk about all the progress over the past few years we haven't been here, to catch up with all the progress, and it's deeply impressive. So BPS is a wonderful institute who's doing some fantastic work, and you should all be very proud of the work the team is doing. Okay, so if we go to the first slide. And the next slide, please. And we can go to the next one again. So the question for today is, what do diesel and flowers have in common? The presentation is broadly about the Bureau of Statistics discussions and interaction with the broader Australian public service. So it is about diesel and flowers, but it's not really about diesel and flowers. It's how the Bureau works across the government. It's how the Bureau works in concert and in conjunction with other agencies to deliver a narrative, to deliver data, to deliver insight into policy decision making. And so to answer the question around diesel and flowers, I'll split the presentation into two sections. The first section, as you can see on the left, is around the context. So the context of Australia and the context of what it is that we're talking about when we talk about diesel and flowers and the commonalities. And so we'll get to that in just a moment. The commonality is urea. Urea is a product that we use across many industries. It's used in transport as an additive to diesel, but it's also used in agriculture as a fertilizer for many, many products like wheat, flowers, for example. And so its uses across Australia are wide and varied and have many interactions with the economy. So that's the first part. I'll set up that in 1 second. The second part is around, and I'll use the Australian context again, obviously, around a noted shortage of urea, and in particular, urea as it's used as a fuel additive. It's called Adblue is the commercial name. And we'll examine that from three interconnected perspectives. So we'll talk about the issue with respect to an informed policy response, as there was an idea that would be a shortage for Australia. We'll look at effective governance and partnerships across the government and the role that the ABS had played in concert with other government agencies. And obviously then, once understanding the issue, having high quality data, so delving into what the Bureau can have access to inform and measure impacts of any forthcoming policy decision. And obviously those last two bits, effective governance and partnerships and high quality data, is where the ABS fits most appropriately in this context. And of course, as we go through, there'll be an Indonesian perspective as well. So all these things should resonate with your interactions with government and the BPS, and hopefully we can share some commonalities on this. And so for the poll for later, so I'll get you to have a look at these headlines now. The poll for later is having a think about what connects these headlines. And so in Australia through COVID, we found ourselves with a shortage, as I imagine the rest of the world did, a shortage of personal protective equipment, so masks, gloves, etc. We also found that on Valentine's Day there was a flower shortage and prices rose as a result, so there's some connection there. The recycling industry said it wasn't ready for a ban on exporting plastic waste. There's another issue there in terms of trade and supply. But the focus for today is on how China's export ban of Adblue, it's a fuel additive, could force diesel trucks off the road in terms of being able to deliver, transport, provide transport services, and would also then have knock-on effects to higher food prices. So there is a raft of headlines there that do have a connection, and as you can imagine, have a bit of a think about the Australian context, and I'll show you in the next slides what I mean by the Australian context. But firstly, once we had realised there would be a shortage of Adblue or urea products, the media began reporting upon these export curbing and the extent to which Australia would then move from importing urea or Adblue from China to Indonesia. So this is another context for you as students to understand what that means for Indonesia. If you're going to then pivot from perhaps using urea domestically or Adblue domestically, what impact does that have on your national statistics and the performance of the economy, moving from perhaps domestic use to exports? So we can see there Australia had to pivot away from a known exporter like China to Indonesia there. Similarly, exports also warned that the Adblue supply could run out, and that would cause major supply chain issues, obviously a major concern for the government and businesses alike. There's also the question, what is urea and what is Adblue? Why was it all of a sudden in the media? And certainly why would it threaten Australia's supply chain? So again, more questions were coming out about what it all meant for Australia. And would we need to create manufacturing capacity in the short term to fix this Adblue shortage? So there are a lot of questions around Adblue. No one quite knew exactly what it was in the broader Australian public, but we knew that it was going to be somewhat of a problem and needed to be looked at and addressed. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So okay, so what is it? What is Adblue? So I'll let you have a bit of a read of that, but broadly speaking, it's an organic compound that's used in many areas across industry. So you can see there that is a manufacturing process, that it's a synthetically manufactured, utilising natural gas, nitrogen and water, reacting at high temperature to produce basically this urea product. Now urea is then used, as you can see there, for fertilisers, in a technical grade urea and also diesel exhaust fluid. Now, diesel exhaust fluid is the one that we'll have a look at a bit more closely. And Adblue is the marketing term for diesel exhaust fluid. And it's a solution of urea and distilled water that is added to diesel engines to break down harmful emissions. So you can see here that this is a critical piece of Australia's infrastructure, the transport infrastructure. And if we were lacking in these additives, it would create some significant difficulties for transport. And so in that context, if we look at transport, that certainly got the attention of government and required a policy response if indeed we were to be running on a short supply of Adblue. So to give you a bit of context about Australia a bit more generally, this map here shows you the relative sizes of Indonesia and Australia. As you can see there, Australia is roughly 4 times the land mass of Indonesia. To give you some context of distances, the population densities are somewhat different as well. Indonesia is more densely populated in its archipelago as opposed to Australia's contiguous land mass and an extent of its coverage. But if we go to the next slide, we can see there that Australia has about 900,000 kilometres of road. So almost 1 million kilometres of road that connects across the country. We have 41,000 kilometres of rail track, 17 nationally significant seaports, and 175 commercial airports. So at least in terms of road and rail and sea, all of those utilise diesel as a fuel, and as a result require these additives to ensure the harmful compounds can be mitigated. Now, the reason why it's kind of important is in this next slide here. So not only do we have to move around quantities of mining material, for example, from mine to port, we also, half of the land mass is agriculture. So broadly speaking, the yellow is more crops, whereas the central part will be more around beef cattle, for example. But the value of agriculture production is around $70 billion, and it contributes 2.5% of GDP. It's 12% of our exports. So agriculture as a piece in Australia's economic puzzle is really quite significant. And so being able to transport goods to market, goods to port, as you can see with the vastness of the country, was critical. And even as a knock-on effect to business and employment, we can see that there's almost 90,000 businesses that are interlinked with agriculture, almost 300,000 employees, and almost 250,000 people in food, beverage and tobacco manufacturing. So you can see there, even at a very narrow agricultural level, there's a significant impact on any disruption to freight, any disruption to transport that would effectively knock out or hamper the contribution of 2.5% of GDP. And that's just in the agriculture space alone. And if we go to the next slide, we can also see that on top of COVID-19, which has precipitated a lot of this supply chain disruption, and in specifically the Adblue, Australia's also had droughts which impact crops. We've had fires which impact other aspects of our economy, and floods again, which disrupts our ability to go about normal business. So as a country, over the past, well, since 2019, 2020, 21, we've had multiple impacts to the economy, multiple disruptions to the way we go about business nationally, and then now with this latest set of events, it's international. And so as a result of that, if we go to the next slide, the Australian context around policy response to national crises was front of mind for our government. And so I'd like to then describe to you in the second half about how government went about its crisis management and the role the Australian Bureau of Statistics has played in that space. Because as you can imagine, decision making without critical information or data becomes quite problematic. And so having the Australian Bureau of Statistics at the forefront or at the table of these discussions was critical to the Australian government being able to provide sound policy responses in this context. So here I'll go through the next few slides and we'll talk about the policy response from government. We'll talk through effective governance and partnerships across government and of course with industry as well. And then we'll talk about having high quality data to inform and measure the impacts of these policy decisions. And again, these three things will be of particular interest, I imagine, to the Indonesian context as well. So we're very happy to share these learnings as we go. So on this slide here, we can obviously, COVID-19 becomes a worldwide pandemic. The impacts on the supply chain issues causing shortages of critical products and inputs. And of course, then we require that policy response I was talking about to address those supply chain vulnerabilities. And so in terms of understanding the impact of the Adblue shortage, there are several questions we ask ourselves as a broader government. So what is Adblue? We've sort of gone through that, but that was a question that was in the forefront of government's mind. Who uses it? Again, we've gone through that a little bit ourselves, but these were fundamental questions that were required to be answered. What are the impacts of the product shortage? And we'll talk about that in broad terms in a second. For example, will prices increase for consumers? Who are the major suppliers of Adblue? What countries currently export urea to Australia? What other countries manufacture urea as part of this Adblue process? And does Australia have the capacity to manufacture it? So all these questions were of critical importance, but fundamentally, do we have the data to measure these impacts? And it's that measurement aspect is where the Australian Bureau of Statistics and it's like its counterparts here, Indonesia, the BPS, these questions are posed to us and for us to respond and to assist as best we can. And so, as they're all pretty great questions, there are great questions because in this simple diagram here, we can highlight how the economy is interconnected. And as you as statistical students, I'm sure you recognise the interconnectedness of the economy. And that any disruption in one sector has the quite large potential to have flow-on impacts through much of the economy. And this one in particular, I think we found that the transport industry, the ability to move things from farm to port, farms to the markets, mines to markets, etc., had a real impact or the potential real impact. And the top section shows how the production of diesel exhaust fluid moves through each of the production processes through to the retailer. And at each stage, the item can either stay produced in the domestic market or be exported or imported. And this, I guess, is something that Australia was grappling with. We were obviously importing urea. We didn't have much of a domestic production facility. We knew that China was not going to be exporting to any country, let alone Australia. So it wasn't just to Australia, it was to any country other than for its own domestic use. So there had to be questions around where Australia would be procuring Adblue from. The bottom section shows some of the industries that may directly require diesel exhaust fluid, so the Adblue. And of course that ranges from road transport, farming machinery, mining machinery, emergency services, and of course other businesses and households. And the section to the right shows all the services that support these industries. And so the knock-on effects, even though we're talking about one specific product, flows through the entirety of the economy on both directly and of course indirectly. So you can see how the Australian government was somewhat concerned when it dawned upon them that Adblue, or the use of urea as a fuel additive, had the potential to be in short supply. And so in terms of measurement, from a statistical point of view, what was needed to measure these flows? And so the question was posed, and of course quality data that is consistent and measured at the appropriate level was critical. And so that's another element to this puzzle. The extent to which the data existed, the extent to which the data is able to be supplied at the appropriate levels, and quality assured at the appropriate levels. And so, for example, imports and exports of urea diesel exhaust fluid, that was the actual requirement. And so not just urea at higher levels. And so this was a critical question posed to the Bureau of Statistics. So if we go to the next slide, we can now start to have a look at the effective governance and partnership aspect of this presentation. So the top we have already visited. So we know that COVID-19 was the pandemic, and that led to the requirement for a policy response to address supply chain vulnerabilities. So one of our central agencies, the Prime Minister and Cabinet, so that is the department dealing directly with the Prime Minister to understand the requirements of the government of the day, allocated budget in the 21-22 financial year to instigate an Office of Supply Chain Resilience. So it was recognised at the highest levels of government that supply chain was going to be a problem through the pandemic. Clearly there were going to be shortages across the board on a range of products, and that needed to be addressed by a strategic way. And in that context, this Office of Supply Chain Resilience within the Prime Minister and Cabinet portfolio was created, and its remit was to monitor vulnerabilities in critical supply chains and to coordinate a response to improve ongoing access to these critical goods. And it utilises a four-stage framework to assess these vulnerable supply chains. And so the way they work is by identifying the vulnerabilities in the supply chain. So again, that is a lot of research and investigation into criticalities across the Australian economy, obviously focusing on those that are imported, in particular, one would imagine. The second is to determine if these are critical to the Australian economy. And I guess that's where the Australian Bureau of Statistics will come in. And it's the measurement of these imports, or the measurement of the impact of a disruption to the supply chain. And what existing measures, if any, are in place to support resilience in the supply chains. So making these assessments on a needs basis as to whether imports are likely to continue, whether exports continue, whether domestic production is a reality in this context. And that leads to number 4, to design those mitigation strategies. And so potentially there are discussions with other countries in terms of their supplies, with industry within Australia regarding the ability to have domestic production of any and all of the vulnerable supply chain goods, and designing a strategy to mitigate the issues at hand. So in this context, given that the Prime Minister and Cabinet Office dealt with the broad range of strategies at play, specifically to deal with the diesel fuel crisis, the Department of Industry, Science and Energy and Resources established an Adblue task force. And that task force worked in concert with the Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet to ensure that the coordinated response was done in a way that was transparent and was able to be effected with the full force of the Office of the Prime Minister. And so the remit of this new task team was to quickly and actively work to ensure supply chains of both refined urea and Adblue are secure, so that industry can have certainty on their operations. And that was the key part here. It was to ensure that industry could continue to produce the goods and the allied services at a constant rate to ensure that supply to the Australian people was maintained. And that's the key of these particular officers. And of course, to leverage into this new collaboration across government, the relevant data to measure the response was also critical. And in this context, as the National Statistical Office, the ABS has played and is playing an active role to advise and to provide that data and that context and that advice to both the Adblue task force and to the Prime Minister and Cabinet task teams. And so the requirements coming out of the task force were to obviously need to understand the extent to which each of the types of urea have been imported and the origins of each of those particular types of urea. And so we can see there that we understand there is a fertiliser grade urea, we understand there's a technical grade, we understand there's a diesel exhaust fluid, which technical grade urea can also be used for that purpose. And we also understand there is other types of urea at lesser levels. Unfortunately, when we went to have a look, the Bureau at large had a look at the level of detail available. We understood that that final level of breakdown was not available at that point in time. So urea as a category was certainly available. That's certainly part of our classifications. But to determine the different breakdowns beyond that broader category was not available at that point in time. And so to then delve into and understand the criticalities or the implications for any of the supply shortages was broadly muddied by the fact we couldn't identify much more clearly the different grades or the different types of urea. So you can see that there is a slight problem then for decision making. And as an institution, as an agency, the ABS, our purpose is to provide data or information or insight for decision making. So there was a role for us to play here to create, find, aggregate new data sources for the task at hand. So we will also ask you to do a poll later around quality and what does quality mean. So in sometimes we sometimes think that quality has only one or two dimensions. Is it sort of accurate or is it on time? But in fact, we use a set of 7 quality dimensions. And these are the 7 quality dimensions here. And this is called the ABS Data Quality Framework. And we use this framework to ensure that our data is up to the task of providing critical information to government across all of our statistics. And so in this context, we talk about the institutional environment, and that speaks to the agency itself, where the institutional organisational factors may have a significant influence on the effectiveness and credibility of the agency producing the statistics. And so we had to think about that. That wasn't one that was going to be an issue in terms of our providing of quality here. Relevance, how well the information meets the needs of users in terms of the concept measured and the population presented. And that's where we started to find there was an issue. So if you'll recall, the Office of Supply Chain Resilience required a further breakdown of the urea component into the constituent parts, but that was not available. So in this context, the relevance was the quality measure that had us the most concerned. Timeliness seemed to be fine, accuracy, coherence, interpretability, and accessibility all were broadly fine as well. So in this context, the relevance was the one that required us to look most closely at this quality dimension. And so when we talk about this aspect of quality, what we're talking about here is the level of disaggregation. And so these next two slides, this one and the next one, highlight the merchandise trade classifications, which are key to understanding that particular bit of quality in that dimension that I just discussed. So the first set of category is the international classification, and that's the top section. And used more broadly across the world is the harmonised system, HS. And that's used by customs and other authorities to regulate, monitor and control imports and exports of goods organised by economic activity or component material. And that's really key for Australia. So we use that as the base, and then that is linked up across the world. So there is comparability. It doesn't matter which country you're in, the HS system allows that comparability across place. Now Australia, like most countries, extends that HS system to meet domestic customs needs. And so we have both an import and an export extension to the harmonised system. So as you can see, at this point, there's an element that says, well, there's a global system, one that is obviously quite embedded and quite critical across the world, but then there's also an Australian extension. So that gives us some place to manoeuvre in terms of trying to identify and create new categories as well. Thank you. So in terms of ownership, now you won't be able to read this, that's fine, but it's just a, yeah, that's right. The context of that slide is just to say there are many stakeholders, and when we're talking about effective governance and partnerships, it's really working in concert across government to ensure we can affect change. So we're talking about classification systems. Across the top of that slide is broadly the international component of that, and on the bottom is the Australian component. So in terms of the Australian component, we are dealing with our customs or border force. The Australian Border Force is our customs agency, or customs fits within that broader border force umbrella. And then we also have ourselves as also custodians of these classifications. And on an international stage, it's the World Trade Organization. And so working in concert across Australia, the key here was to have a united and effective approach to ensuring that the classification systems could be modified appropriately and with confidence. So just a quick update, or looking back on the global scale, so the World Customs Organization. So again, I won't go too far into it, but it's a 5-yearly update, and the last update was effective on the 1st of January of this year. So quite clearly, on an international scale, updates weren't going to be happening, and that's fine too, because the level of disaggregation wasn't really appropriate for this application. But you can see there that there's a whole system of process to update the HS, and that goes from proposal down through implementation. That's a 2.5-year process. Now, quite clearly, updates were not going to be done over a month or 2 months or 3-month period. It's certainly more of a 2.5 to 3 to 4 year time span. And to impact change in this context is a cost to government and industry. So these changes aren't normally done overnight or without consultation. So on the world stage, there was comfort to remain as it was in this context and to focus more on the domestic front. So in terms of updating domestic customs information, it's still a rigorous and lengthy process, but it's certainly one that sits within the remit of the Australian government. Because as we said before, and as I highlighted in that previous spaghetti graph, the decisions can be made within the Australian government alone. And so there was an Australian Border Force in conjunction with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, working with Prime Minister and Cabinet to effect some of these changes in this context. And so here you can sort of see that there was a decision made to update the classifications, and that's prompted by the Adblue crisis or situation. Change of legislation might be required. I don't think it was at this stage, but that'll be overseen by Australian Border Force. Updates to the infrastructure to support the classification. Again, Australian Border Force and the Australian Bureau of Statistics will be key in this environment, and the new statistics made available, and that would then flow through to the Australian Bureau of Statistics outputs. And that'd be key across a number of publications, including our trade information, balance of payments and national accounts, as you could imagine. Now, key to this, and it's probably not so much in this context, but more broadly, changes to tariff and customs information do have other impacts. For example, in terms of revenue for the country, imports are taxed in some cases, and that has a flow-on effect to revenue. Also, respondent burden. It's key to understand that the more you add to a customs form, or the more that you ask people to do, there is a respondent burden aspect to that, and that sometimes is not viewed favourably as a general rule. We're trying to reduce respondent burden across industry so they can get on with doing business rather than filling out additional aspects to surveys or paperwork. So that's a bit of a red tape reduction. Compliance as well, so there's an impact on existing regulation and compliance. So again, it's more of a burden aspect, and again, costly to implement. So the more you change, the more elements there are to, in terms of cost, both to the business and for government alike. So both industry and government will have a part of that as a cost implication. So you can imagine that creating quite large changes aren't looked particularly favourably upon. Having said that, to understand in this context the impacts of Adblue was certainly enough of a driver to push through some changes. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the results of the collaboration across government. So we can see there that in the international section, the harmonised system, the HS, owned by the WCO, that remained the same. So you can see there, starting from right at the top, the products of chemical allied industries, and that remained as it was down to the broader urea category. So the subheading there under the HS remains as urea. When you get to the Australian component though, for both exports and imports, you can see that there was a broad agreement and quick agreement to remove the urea category, the top one, and replace that with 4 subcategories, which then allowed for disaggregation of that urea top category, and then will enable analysis to take place. And so then you could start to see how much urea was in the fertiliser space, how much urea is in technical grade, likewise for diesel exhaust, fluid, and for other. And so that was really the collaboration that was undertaken by the Australian government, and certainly was executed with relative speed and relative cost efficiency as well. So not forgetting, of course, that this will have an impact on business, because they would have to fill out and they would have to supply information on these lower level bits of information. So there is an impost to industry, and so there's a communication aspect and a collection aspect. There's also a collection and aggregation and publication aspect, and that would fall to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And so in this context, you can see that there was an improvement to the level of classification. So the harmonised system for both imports and exports were upgraded. There was an improvement of the relevance of the data for an informed policy response. And so then we could truly understand the impact of diesel exhaust fluid or the Adblue shortage, because now you could see it in our data. And you could also then improve the quality from that perspective of one of the 7 quality dimensions for our official statistics in terms of the international merchandise trade statistics, the balance of payments, which flows on directly from international merchandise trade, and then obviously to the external parts of the national accounts. So it was a straight line from improvement in classifications to improvements in our national accounts in a relatively swift manner. And so here are some of the outputs. So these data were released last Thursday. So perhaps you saw them come out last Thursday? I'm not sure. No? No? I saw them come out last Thursday. And so this is actually relatively exciting for a statistician, so maybe that's a bit sad, I'm not sure. I think it's a bit sad. But as you can see here, so this is the first cut of information where urea had been broken down into finer categories. Now this particular graph is not of the broken down, it is just of the top level urea. So we'll get to the breakdowns in a second. And as you can also see, this is by customs value. So there's going to be a price effect here. So not forgetting, of course, the global impacts of the latest global interactions that have created some supply chain disruption. So obviously the war in Ukraine is the top of mind, I guess. And so you can see there that while there is a price effect, as you would imagine, in customs value, the April data was the first that has been released with this new classification. And what was interesting was that when we were able to break it down, we found that 98% of this urea was in fact for fertiliser. So actually quite a limited amount was for Adblue or as a fuel additive for our transport fleet. So that was one of the first interesting points. So as you can see, this is quite an interesting phase to be in. So although this is our first cut of data, the team has also done some work to backcast and provide some prior information as well. So we'll get to that in just one second. But if we go to the next slide, it was really quite important to then understand where these inflows of urea came from. And as you can sort of see, broadly, it's Middle Eastern countries such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, supplemented by imports from Indonesia and Malaysia, were actually the most important. And so while China is there, you can see it there, it's actually relatively small in this time series here. And so, but this is still in terms of total urea. And so we still haven't gotten to the nub of the question yet. And so if we go to one of our final slides here, you can now see that when we account for levels of urea for technical grade or Adblue grade, we can see that China was indeed a significant supplier through the previous period, specifically you can see September 21 onwards. And then when the bans came into place from, say, December onwards, you can see that there is obviously dropped off completely. But then you can see the rise of Indonesian imports of urea, actually supplementing, and again, there's a price component to this because it is customs value, but you can see that imports from Indonesia has risen. You can see that there was nothing from China, or very minimal in China from February, but then that Chinese imports have also come back through March and also into April. So I will note that this is model data prior to April. So April is actual. Prior to April, March, Feb, Jan back is modelled information. So it takes as an assumption that the proportions, I imagine, remained relatively constant. So we're not going to publish those previous data, the model data. We've brought that here for you to share, just to have a discussion. But it's key to understand that now we do have a much better picture of where our technical grade urea comes from, and we now have a much better picture that it indeed did come from Indonesia, that no, we don't seem to have an issue in terms of our supply, although we want to account for price effect as well, so it's not definitive, but it certainly gives us a much clearer picture of where our urea for Adblue comes from, and what the state of play is in this context. So we're coming a bit closer to the end, so thanks for staying with me. So what connects these headlines? So a bit of a common theme there was that we think there's a bit of effort in terms of trade. We see there's supply chain. We see there's elements of disruption from multiple impacts, and we're certainly not seeing the end of the disruption. But what also brings these particular headlines together is the fact that the ABS will need to work with our Border Force and Customs agencies to ensure that the classifications are at an appropriate level to ensure analyses and insight and data can be provided in a relatively quick, timely manner to ensure that decision making can be made with respect to our supply chains. And so one of the things that connects them, yes, they're all disruptions due to trade or other issues, but also the need for the ABS to be at the forefront of our ability to determine, devise, create new information for government to make decisions in a timely manner. Okay, so I think the poll is now open.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abundante. Please give applause for Mr. Abundante, just to freshen you up. It is a fascinating topic with crystal clear explanation. I'm sure that the audience here got your message and maybe already have question in their mind. Now I would like to ask the audience to involve in the polling session. Please prepare your smartphone, your laptop, PC. For the online participants, you welcome to involve in this polling session. Please excuse me, Mr. Abundante and Ibu Darian. I will lead the polling session in Bahasa Indonesia. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati dan teman-teman mahasiswa, silahkan untuk mengikuti polling ini. Bisa mengakses www.menti.com dan menggunakan kode akses 30271422. Mungkin bisa ditayangkan ke layar. Sekali lagi bisa mengakses, terdapat di atas slide www.menti.com dan memasukkan kode akses 30271422. Kita akan kuis. Polling. Enggak kuis, maaf. Polling. It's not quiz but polling. Untuk yang pertama, untuk polling yang pertama. Kita mulai ya Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman. Mengenai data quality atau kualitas data. Jadi Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman mahasiswa diminta untuk mengisikan jawaban dalam bahasa Inggris satu kata. Kemudian mengisikan sebanyak 3 kali. 3 kali mengisi, setiap kali mengisi satu kata dalam bahasa Inggris. Pertanyaannya adalah, apa yang dimaksud dengan kualitas data? Atau apa yang Anda bayangkan jika mendengar tentang kualitas data? Silahkan mulai dijawab Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman mahasiswa. Hasilnya nanti akan langsung muncul ke layar. Ini hasilnya. Sebagian besar menjawab relevans. Relevance, accuracy, valid, accurate, reliable. Sepertinya menyimak lecture-nya tadi. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman mahasiswa. Jangan khawatir, masih ada 2 lagi. Sekarang untuk yang kedua, polling yang kedua adalah mengenai key message atau kata kunci. Sekali lagi, Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman mahasiswa mengisikan jawaban dalam bahasa Inggris 1 kata, kemudian mengisi sebanyak 3 kali. Pertanyaannya adalah, apa kata kunci dari presentasi yang disajikan oleh Mr. Abu Dante barusan? Silahkan mulai menjawab Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman. Diesel. Wow. Diesel, Adblue, urea. Kata kuncinya. Shortage. Key message-nya banyak sekali ya Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman. Oke, berikutnya untuk yang ketiga. Untuk yang ketiga mungkin agak panjang soalnya. Jadi terdapat 4 jenis headlines. Tadi di paparan Mr. Abu Dante juga sudah ditunjukkan. Jadi pertanyaan untuk polling yang ketiga ini adalah what connects these headlines? Apa yang menjadi benang merah atau menghubungkan antar headline tersebut? Jadi nanti jawabannya akan diisikan juga dalam bahasa Inggris. Hanya 1 kali isi dan maksimum 3 kata, maksimal 3 kata. Untuk headline yang pertama adalah shortage of personal protective equipment endangering health workers worldwide. Kekurangan alat pelindung diri atau APD dapat membahayakan tenaga kesehatan di seluruh dunia. Kemudian headline yang kedua, Valentine's Day, ruin as flower shortage send prices skyrocketing. Hari Valentine menjadi kacau akibat kekurangan pasokan bunga yang mengakibatkan harga bunga melambung tinggi. Headline yang ketiga, how China's export ban could force diesel trucks that need the Adblue exhaust fluid off the road and lead to higher food prices. Bagaimana larangan ekspor China dapat memaksa truk diesel yang membutuhkan cairan knalpot Adblue untuk berhenti beroperasi dan menyebabkan harga pangan naik lebih tinggi. Untuk headline yang keempat, recycling industry not ready for ban on exporting plastic waste. Industri daur ulang belum siap untuk larangan ekspor sampah plastik. Jadi sekali lagi pertanyaannya adalah apa yang menjadi benang merah menghubungkan antar headline tersebut? Jawaban sekali isi dan maksimum 3 kata. Silakan Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman mahasiswa untuk mulai mengisikan. Berikut adalah hasilnya. Sepertinya lebih diverse dari sebelumnya. supply chain shortage, data policy. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman untuk partisipasinya di dalam polling. Very well, ladies and gentlemen. Now we come to the question and answer session. Let me start with the audience in this auditorium first. Please raise your hand if you have any question to Mr. Abudante. Ada teman-teman mahasiswa? Silakan. Please introduce yourself, your name, your class.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman semua. Good morning Mr. Abodante. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Riza Rizky. And I'm third year student in Polytechnic Statistika SIS from class 3SK2, 3SK2.
Maaf, namanya siapa?
Riza.
Riza, oke.
Yeah. I want to ask about, as Mr. Abodante said, there are three perspectives considered. First is informed policy response, quality data to inform and measure impacts, and effective governance and partnerships. I want to ask about who is responsible for effective governance and partnership between government and private sector. Is Australian Bureau of Statistics involved in this? If yes, can you give an example? I think it's enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reza, for the question. I think Mr. Abudante, please respond to this question.
Thank you for your question. That's an excellent question. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics does a lot with private sector. In particular, we're definitely engaging in the use of larger data sets, so big data, to inject into our statistics. And so in this context, we work quite closely with, say, for example, supermarkets to provide information that are used in our CPI. And in that way, we can have quite frequent supply of information on critical food items at quite high frequency and quite high accuracy levels to feed into critical macroeconomic statistics such as the CPI. So there's a lot of interaction with industry to ensure our data supplies are of the highest quality, but also, as you can imagine, using administrative data or data from industry. The Australian Bureau of Statistics doesn't have to go out and collect the information individually. So historically, price collectors would go to supermarkets to look at the price over time and provide that information back to the Bureau. But in this context, it's much more machine-based. Data is supplied at a very high frequency, at a very high accuracy, at a very low level. And as you can imagine, that's quite efficient in the context of both human resources and in terms of compilation. Data is already in a format that can be aggregated quite quickly and quite accurately, and that leads to some good outcomes in terms of quality of ABS statistics. So yes, working with government, but working with industry has provided some good ways for the Bureau to push forward on the quality dimension, in terms of quality, but also timeliness and efficiency for human resource.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abudante, for the response. For the second opportunity, I would like to welcome the audience from the Zoom room. We have one student that already raised hand. I think Billy Alpha, please introduce yourself, please.
Okay, am I audible? Miss?
Yes,
Is
it's
it clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
You may start.
Good morning, sir. My name is Billy Alfarisi. I'm a third year student of Polytechnic Statistika STS, and I'm on the science data class. So my question is, one of the most important points in this presentation is how ABS can provide a good quality data that can help the government to face this Adblue shortage. And my question is how ABS can maintain the quality of their data over a long time period.
That's it, Billy?
Yes, that's it.
Thank you, Billy. Please, Mr. Abundante, to respond.
Now that's a good question. I think that's a very good question. So in the context of these data, because they're derived from, they come from our customs service, it's a very secure, very detailed, very very old relationship. So Australia has received, as I imagine BPS has received customs information from its customs service for over 100 years we've received. So it's a very long-standing relationship, very clear delivery mechanisms. So in terms of this specific set of data, this was about trying to delve into the lowest levels that we could possibly publish without breaching our legislation around confidentiality. So in this context, it wasn't as difficult as it could be. As you can imagine, if you had to delve into even lower or into areas where data simply wasn't available, that would become much more problematic. And so that would be an issue that would be much more difficult to resolve in a timely manner. Data quality, I think by adhering to our data quality framework, having very strong and tight methodologies, using a methodological panel to discuss any changes to our economic statistics is another key way. That's obviously moving away from administrative data, but ensuring that there are structures and governance in place around our statistical procedures, around our outputs, that when information does change, when situations change, we have a rigorous process to move from source data to methodology to output, and we do that in a very structured way. So in that context, whenever we find we are updating information, updating methodologies, updating sources, so sources, concepts and methods, updating any of those things that will change the statistic at the end of the day or require, so for example, backcasting, we have a rigorous process to go through that allows us to have a transparency around any change that elevates the discussion to the relevant levels in terms of seniority to get sign-off, and that enables us to go with confidence around the quality and coherence of our data despite changes occurring in other concept, data source or methodology. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for the answer.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much, Billy and Mr. Abundante. And then for the third one, I think I already got one question in the Google form. This one is from Siti Armanisa. I will read your question. In 7 dimensions of data quality, could you explain more why the case of urea data was not relevant, and to make data become more relevant, ABS used way to improve the classification levels to provide more detailed data, but it costs a lot. In the future, is there any alternative solution to solve the relevant problem by using the other way that more costless?
So if I understand the question, it's around the interconnectedness of change and cost. Yes. That's basically what we're saying, yeah. It's a good question. We're always looking to do things with more accuracy and with less cost. Like every agency around the world, we have reducing budgets, and we need to work in ways that we work smarter with more data, with other methodologies and other ways in which to compile our national statistics. I guess in this case, the data was available but required a final level of disaggregation, and so in that context, the cost perhaps wasn't as great as it could have been, but certainly needed agreement and cooperation to make that happen. But more broadly, as I was sort of suggesting before, that as we move into the big data space, as we move into leveraging data assets across government, that enables us to have opportunity to reduce costs in general. And I think that's where the ABS has turned to, with a view to becoming more efficient, becoming more, have greater amounts of data, becoming more able to provide solutions to government and to industry around decision making. So that's probably not exactly the answer to the question. I think we would have found that it would be an interesting dynamic if the solution to the problem was much more costly, but I think, as you saw from the presentation, the impact of not understanding the problem would have been far greater than whatever the cost would have been to solve the issue. So again, that's not exactly the answer to the question, but I understand where the question is coming from. And I guess it's weighing up what the benefit to the cost would be, but more broadly for the organisation to look for ways to reduce cost, increase efficiency, and increase the utility of the agency to the government. And by pivoting away from just providing statistics to providing data, to providing insight, providing narrative, that value proposition increases. So positioning ourselves at that forefront around providing that data is of critical importance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abudante. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a really interesting discussion, but I'm afraid because of limited time, we have to wrap up until this point. Please allow me to read my short recap based on today's lecture. We already have demonstrated on how the three perspectives are connected. The first is the issue required an informed policy response from the government, and the second is through effective governance and partnership across government and with the industry. And the third one is having high quality data to inform and measure the impact of policy decisions. Using the example of the scarcity of Adblue in Australia, we can learn that the informed and targeted policy response require two things. The first is the good government and effective partnership, and the second is the high quality data to inform and measure the impact. The role of the National Statistical Office is paramount in providing quality data to support decision making and also problem solving. So now we are really arriving at the end of the session. I would like to thanks to Mr. Abudante for his informative lecture and exciting discussion, and also thanks to the audience for your active participation, for Reza, Billy, and Siti for their question. Please once again give a big applause for all of us. Thank you. Hopefully this discussion will be beneficial for all. I would like to apologize to Mr. Abudante and team and all of audience if any of you encounter any inconvenience during this session. For Mr. Abudante and Ibu Darian Collins, who will return to Australia this afternoon, have a nice flight until we meet again next time. Thank you very much for your attention and good morning. Back to MC Nori.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Nuka Widowati, and we would like to ask you kindly remain on the stage as Polytechnic Statistika STIS and BPS Statistics Indonesia would like to present a token of appreciation to the Honorable Speaker, Mr. Abundante, and distinguished guest, Ms. Colin. And to present the token, we kindly invite Your Excellency, Mr. Imam Mahdi and Mrs. Erni Triastuti. Mr. Imam Mahdi, Mrs. Erni Triastuti, and Ms. Darian Colin, you might take the floor. Please proceed to the stage. The placard and certificate for Mr. Abundante, and then the certificate for Miss Colin. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause. Mr. Imam Mahdi, please kindly remain on the stage for the closing statement. Yeah. Mrs. Ernie, Mr. Abundante, Miss Colin, and Mrs. Nuke, please kindly return to the seat. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, return to the seat.
Bisa ya? Iya. Gini aja deh.
Yeah, Mr. Imam Mahdi, time is yours.
Thank you very much. Pakai bahasa Indonesia, bahasa Inggris ini? Apa bahasa Jawa? Oke, Pak Michael mengerti bahasa Indonesia ya. So if you can talk with him in bahasa, I think he's okay. But he will reply in English. Pak Michael, Bu Darian, thank you very much for coming to the institutes, Bu Ernie and all those lecturers, and my lovely students, especially the women. Oh no, and boys also. Thank you very much. Today we have a very special day. Ngerti nggak ngomong bahasa Inggris? Okay, they have excellent English. Today is very special that Pak Michael and Bu Darian from the ABS, Australian Bureau of Census, is coming to the bahasa Inggrisnya apa ya? Sekolah Polytechnic Statistics, STIS. Begitu ya. Sorry if my English is broken. Kadang-kadang ya gitu. Kan saya tinggalnya di Jaksel nih, anak Jaksel tuh bahasa Indonesia campur English gitu ya. Jadi apa? Balis bahasa English gitu. Ya mixnya campur-campur ya. Jadi bahasanya gitu. The lecture today give very good lessons to us that BPS is now, the role is not just to produce the data, but we need to give some insights. So those questions and the lectures today is, it triggers, induce your minds how you can have like the insights among those problems. If you're given the problems, it means you need to think about what data can support and how you make a relationship among this data. You have to connect between the dots, between the problems. But in fact, the data is not really owned by BPS, but sometimes the data is owned by other government agencies. So how you connect relates those data, but the data are not belong to us. So what we are going to do with this? And then, what the Pak Michael give a lesson to us, we need to improve our governance and partnerships. Governance means you have to know the roles and responsibility of each government agencies, what is the role and responsibility of BPS, and what is the roles and responsibility of other government agencies. And then how can we collaborate with the governance and also collaborate with the data. But it's not stopped right there. You have to think about more and then induce your minds, what is the insight, what is the basic problem with this, what is the roots, the cause of the problems, and what's the answer for the government, for the president actually. This is your jobs, yeah? And you have learned more in this school. It's not about technical statistics, but you have to learn more about on the governance, how you can make connection with other government agencies. But in this case, since you are still students, you can practice PKL itu apa ya? In the PKL ya, PKL. Oh no. It's like practical training to in BPS and also in the local government. They are sent to given some problems and try to solve. Whether they are doing some surveys or they are proposed with some solutions. So this is the way we give more competence to the students. In addition, you are asked also to be the future of BPS. So how to become the future of BPS? You have to improve yourself. So this is not enough just given by the school, but the way you learn, it's more on your self-learning capacity. You have to build to that direction. Because I don't think all those lecturers here can give all of those components to you. So what do you want to be in the future? So you have to prepare yourself from right now. Okay? You got it? Oh, good. Oh, pinter ya anak-anak ternyata ya. They're pinter ya. Pinter means smart, yeah. Ternyata. Okay, for those who attending in this room, you may have like selfie photo with Pak Michael and Bu Dairan. Do you want to take a picture with them? Yes? Instead of me? Oh no, come on. I know because Pak Michael is ganteng ya. Pak Michael, do you know ganteng? Ganteng is like me. But you are more. That's the real condition, yeah? That's why they ask you taking photo with you and also Bu Darian, ya. Bu Darian is cantik ya. Bu Darian tahu ya cantik ya? Tahu dia. Karena sudah sering ke Indonesia. Jadi saya mau bilang pretty gitu agak malu saya. Cantik saja. But I'm sorry for those who is attending in virtual. You just can see from distance, yeah, the way our taking picture with the Pak Michael and Bu Darian. Overall, that BPS and ABS has very long relationship, about more than 25 years. Is more than your age actually. Umurnya berapa? 50? 50? Oh, 21, okay, still young. But our relationship is more than your age. So that means BPS is try to be as much as possible to satisfy the international standard in terms of the statistical implementations. So we learn more about this implementation from the ABS, and also ABS learn about the way BPS implementing the statistical activities, so that it can enrich our knowledge how we collaborate in international things about the statistics. So the future is on you guys. And BPS has really privileged having the School of Statistics. Other NSO doesn't have like us. So in terms of human resource, basically we have a very optimistic way that the future of BPS will be much better in the future. I trust you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Imam Mahdi, for delivering your remarks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this event's general lecture, Understanding the Economy and National Statistical Office Response to Shortages, Disruption, and COVID-19. On behalf of the host and the committee, I would like to extend our deepest appreciation. Thank you very much for your attendance and attention. I hope you found the presentation informative and helpful. I am Nori Wilantika. See you in another event. Good afternoon. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are going to have a photo session. Distinguished guests and lecturers, students, please come forward for a group photo. Please come forward for a group photo. Bapak Ibu dosen silakan maju ke depan, Bapak Ibu, untuk foto bersama.